On a stormy night in a forgotten hotel, a mysterious room appears only through photographs, room 317. When a photographer captures it, he realizes too late that some images don't just record reality, they trap souls. If you love psychological horror, cursed places, and haunting stories, this nightmare will stay with you. People still say that every old hotel has one room the staff never mention. One that does not appear on any fire escape map, is not recorded in any maintenance log, does not exist in the booking system, yet still exists in the receptionist's evasive eyes, in the lowered voice of the night guard, in the habit of guests shutting their doors tightly if they have ever spent a night there and stepped out the next morning with faces as if some part of their soul had been drained away. Hong Ban Hotel, tucked behind an old row of buildings near the suburban train station, was such a place. It had stood there for more than 60 years. A 7-story building constructed in an old architectural style, with a narrow, tall facade, its dirty yellow walls blotched in patches like the skin of someone with a disease. The hotel sign hung crookedly, and whenever the night wind blew through, it made a dry metallic clanging sound that caused passers-by, if they happened to glance up, to look only briefly before hurrying on. The locals did not like walking past that street after 10 at night. They never explained exactly why. Some said the area had once been an old infirmary. Some claimed the ground beneath it had once been a wartime cemetery. Others said the real reason lay on the 3rd floor, at the end of a corridor that in daylight was only as long as any other hotel hallway. But after midnight became so deep and endless it no longer seemed to belong to the structure of an ordinary building. Min learned about that hotel from an old post on a photography forum. The post contained only a few blurry, low-quality pictures of a hallway washed in a yellowed tint, a spiral wooden staircase leading upward, dusty window frames with light pouring through them like dirty water. The person who posted it wrote briefly that it was a perfect location for a photo series about forgotten places. Beneath the dozens of comments discussing composition, grain, lenses, and the best time to shoot, there was one strange comment that simply said, "If you go there, don't take photos on the 3rd floor. Especially don't photograph the door numbered 317. The account that posted that comment had been deleted. No one replied. No one asked further questions. Yet it was precisely that short sentence that caught Min's attention. Min was 29, a freelance photographer. He specialized in photographing streets, old architecture, and places with stories. For a long period, people had begun to say that Min's photos were beautiful but cold. All technique and no haunting soul. He understood that, even if he did not want to admit it. Min always believed that a photograph only truly lived when it contained something the viewer could not explain. A very slight distortion between what appeared and what should have appeared. So when he read the warning about room 317, he did not feel fear, only excitement, like a hunter catching the scent of tracks in damp earth. To him, ghost stories were only the layer of superstitious dust covering old buildings. Everything could be explained by the angle of the light, by hallucination, by spatial structure creating unease, by people exaggerating what they did not understand. Min had slept alone in an abandoned hospital to take photos, wandered through graveyards at 3 in the morning, stood in the flooded basement of an old cinema listening to pipes knocking together like someone tapping at a door. Nothing had ever happened. No ghost had ever crawled out of the dark. He booked a room at Hong Van Hotel for 3 nights, saying he was photographing a personal project about buildings slowly dying in the heart of the city. The moment he stepped out of the car in front of the hotel, Min felt something strange that was difficult to name. It was not fear, but the feeling that the place was looking back at him. The glass entrance door was cloudy, reflecting his face in a warped shape. The wind chime hanging from the awning swayed very slightly even though there was no wind. The lobby was narrow and low-ceilinged, with a dark wooden reception desk worn smooth by time. The wall clock ran a few minutes slow. The air smelled of long-standing dampness mixed with the scent of old incense and something faintly metallic and rancid, like a towel left too long in a basin of water until it had begun to rot. The woman behind the reception desk looked to be in her 50s. Her hair tied low, her face unnaturally pale as if powdered, though her lips were an unusually dark shade. She looked at Min longer than necessary before taking his ID card, then asked whether he would be staying alone. The question itself was ordinary, but her voice was low and slow, as if she were confirming something more important than a check-in detail. Min was assigned room 308, on the 3rd floor. When he heard the room number, he merely raised an eyebrow slightly and smiled. An interesting coincidence. The woman handed him a brass key, not a card key like in modern hotels. As Min slung his camera bag over his shoulder, she suddenly spoke, her eyes still lowered to the registration book. After midnight, if you hear knocking at the door, don't open it. If you hear someone calling your name in the hallway, don't answer. And if you go taking pictures, you should only shoot the staircase or the lobby downstairs. Only then did she look up and give a smile that was too thin. The light on the upper floors isn't very good. Min answered with a polite smile. In his mind, warnings like that only made the experience feel more cinematic. He carried his things up to the 3rd floor. The hallway was long, carpeted in dark patterned fabric worn threadbare down the middle. On either side were wooden doors painted brown, with crooked brass room numbers attached. The wall lamps had cloudy yellow glass shades that made everything the color of photographs faded by time. At the far end of the hall stood a tall window, but the light coming through it was weak, as if a layer of black cloth had been draped over the outside. Room 308 lay somewhere in the middle. The room was small, with a low ceiling, a single bed, a wooden desk, an old wardrobe, and a bathroom tiled in yellowing ceramic. Everything was clean in the way of an old place carefully maintained. Yet the moment he stepped inside, Min felt an unusual coldness in the room, a kind of cold that did not come from temperature but from the absence of human warmth. As if no one had lived there in a long time, and it had only been arranged to look as though someone once had. That afternoon Min began taking test shots. He photographed the staircase, the wooden handrail, the windows, the old broken vending machine tucked in a corner on the 2nd floor, and the dusty landscape paintings hanging askew. The light here truly had something photogenic about it. Every time he looked through the viewfinder, he felt the hotel become older, deeper, and as if there were always another thin layer of shadow lying behind every object. Yet when he looked with the naked eye, there was nothing there. Min assumed it was only a contrast effect. He kept shooting until near evening. Back in his room, he sat reviewing the photos on his screen. Most of them were fine, and a few were even excellent. But when he reached the series of photos from the third-floor hallway, taken around 5 in the afternoon, he suddenly froze. In the 7th photo, at the end of the corridor, to the right of the window frame, a faint door appeared. It stood in a place where he clearly remembered there being only a blank stretch of wall. The door looked old, its paint peeling away, and in the middle was a rectangular metal number plate. Min zoomed in, though the image was slightly grainy. He could still read the number, 317. He frowned. He was certain he had not seen that door with his own eyes when he took the shot. Min flipped back through the entire sequence from the same position. In the first 6 photos, there was nothing. In the 7th, the door appeared. In the 8th, the door was gone. He enlarged the image, examined the details, checked the settings. There was no sign of editing. The pictures had been taken in burst mode only seconds apart. He tried to reassure himself that it might be the angle, a cast shadow, or a reflection from the glass at the end of the corridor. But even Min did not fully believe his own explanation. That evening, while eating noodles at a small restaurant next door, Min asked the owner about Hongban Hotel. The woman, who had been ladling broth, suddenly stopped. She glanced quickly outside as though afraid someone might overhear, and only then said that there had once been a death there. The hotel had changed owners many times, but no one ever managed to keep it for long. More than 20 years earlier, a young woman had rented a room there by the month because she worked at a wedding photo studio near the station. Her name was Lan, according to people. She was very pretty, had a talent for photography, and was about to get married. One night during a heavy storm, she was found dead in her room, her neck broken, her eyes open, and her camera shattered on the floor. The police concluded it was either suicide or an accident caused by mental instability. But the local people whispered that before she died, she had photographed something in a room on the 3rd floor that was never meant to exist. From that point on, guests occasionally complained that their photos taken in the hotel contained strangers, or doors that were not really there. At this point, the restaurant owner lowered her voice. They say that room doesn't show itself to everyone, only to the people it wants to show itself to. Min laughed it off, but when he returned to the hotel, he did not go straight back to his room. Instead, he stopped at the reception desk. The woman from earlier was still sitting there, as if she had never moved. Min placed his camera on the counter, brought up the image of door 317, and asked, "Where is this on the 3rd floor, ma'am?" For the briefest instant, the smile vanished from her face. Her skin seemed to turn even paler. She stared at the photo without blinking. After a while, she pushed the camera back toward him. The camera glitched. She said, "There is no room like that here." Her voice was flat, but the hand resting on the counter was clenched so tightly that the knuckles had turned white. Min asked again where that stretch of wall was and why it had shown up like that. She looked up, and for the first time her eyes showed real fear. "If you still want to sleep peacefully tonight," she said softly, "don't go looking for it." At midnight, Min still had not gone to sleep. Her words clung to him like a hook. Outside the window, the city had fallen silent. Every so often a distant night train could be heard. sounding like someone groaning far beneath the ground. Min sat at the desk, editing the photos on his laptop. At around 12:13, the room light flickered once and then steadied. Almost at the same moment, footsteps sounded outside in the hallway. Slow, heavy, dragging across the carpet like someone walking barefoot with wet feet. Min looked up. The footsteps came from the beginning of the corridor, slowly drawing closer until they stopped directly outside room 308. Then came 3 soft knocks. Knock, 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 not loud, but steady enough to hear clearly. Min remembered the receptionist's warning and stayed still. There was no voice outside. Only a few seconds later, a woman's voice, very soft, rose from the other side of the door. Right beside it, Min. A chill shot through him. He had not told anyone his name except when handing over his ID. That voice was not old like the receptionist's. It was younger, thinner, and carried a slight breathlessness, as though its owner had just finished crying. Min, it called again. Come out and look at this for a moment. Min remained motionless, his heart pounding. He told himself it could be a joke, maybe some staff member, but just as he stood up to peek through the peephole, the voice outside suddenly changed, growing hoarse and warped, like a tape recording being slowed down. Min, come out? I took your picture already. Then came a very faint laugh, sounding like water seeping through a crack. The next morning, Min opened the door to check. No one was in the hallway, but on the carpet right in front of his room there were still dark, wet footprints leading toward the end of the corridor. All that morning Min tried to behave as if nothing had happened. He went downstairs to the lobby for coffee and asked the night guard whether anyone had gone up to the 3rd floor the previous night. The old guard with gray hair avoided his gaze and only replied shortly that no one went up there after 11. Min said he had heard someone calling at his door. The old man fell silent for a long time before asking back. Did it call your name? Min had not yet answered when the man turned away to light a cigarette. The hand holding the lighter was visibly trembling. After a while, he said very softly, almost to himself, anyone who hears it call and opens the door usually doesn't stay until morning. Min was not someone who backed down easily. The fear from the previous night had turned into a kind of professional obsession. He needed to know whether room 317 was real or just something conjured by a mind already primed for suggestion. Late in the afternoon, Min brought his camera back to the 3rd floor. In daylight the hallway looked normal, though it was still long and underlit. He walked to the far end, where the strange door had appeared in the photo the day before. There was only an old wallpapered wall there, bubbled and peeling, beside the dusty window frame. Min knocked on the wall. The sound was dull and solid, not hollow. He took many shots from different angles. Nothing unusual appeared on the camera screen at the time. He tried filming a video, panning slowly along the corridor. To the naked eye everything remained normal. But when he played it back, in one frame lasting less than half a second, the wall to the right of the window sank inward into a patch of darkness like an open doorway. Deep inside that darkness, something pale flashed past, like a face snatching itself quickly backward. Min felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. He stepped 2 paces closer and touched the wall with his hand. The surface was icy cold, damp like the skin of a feverish person. The moment his fingers touched the wallpaper, A strange sensation ran up his arm. The feeling that someone was standing inside the wall, pressing their face against the other side. Min jerked his hand back. A very faint sound came from behind the wall, like fingernails scratching once across a surface. That night the rain came. It rained hard, beating against the windows and awning in violent rhythms. The electricity in the hotel flickered several times. Min sat in his room, unable to take his eyes off the camera on the table. Since the afternoon, he had reviewed all the old photos and the video again and again. Among the dozens of pictures he had taken, only one was different. At the end of the corridor, where there should have been nothing, door 317 had appeared a little more clearly than before. The brass doorknob was tarnished. The crack beneath the door was pure black. What was even more horrifying was that beneath the door a human shadow stretched out into the hallway, as if someone were standing just inside, very close behind the wood. Min did not remember seeing that shadow when he pressed the shutter. At exactly midnight, the room lights went out. Only a second later, the backup power came on, weaker and more yellow. The room was submerged in a sickly dim light. At the same moment, dragging footsteps sounded in the hallway again. This time they did not stop outside room 308 like the night before. The footsteps went straight toward the far end of the corridor. Then came the sound of a wooden door slowly opening. A very thin wave of cold air slipped through the cracks of Min's room even though the window was shut. On the table, the camera screen suddenly lit up by itself. The photo of door 317 appeared without him touching anything. The number on the brass plate seemed damp, darker. On the screen, the door was opening little by little. Min did not know what took hold of him at that moment. Foolishness, curiosity, or some other urge that had been creeping into his mind since when. He could not tell. He picked up the camera, opened his room door, and stepped into the hallway. The wall lamps flickered, rain pounded somewhere beyond, and at the end of the hall, where in the afternoon there had only been a blank wall, there was now a real door. Old, low, with paint peeling like rotting skin. The number 317 was attached crookedly. From the edges of the door, a dark liquid seeped out and ran in thin strands onto the carpet. The air had turned sharply cold, so cold that every breath Min exhaled seemed to leave a faint mist. He walked very slowly. With every step he took, the corridor seemed to lengthen. The doors to the rooms on either side began to look unfamiliar, slightly warped, like things seen through water. When he was still a few meters from 317, he heard whispers from inside. Not one voice but many, layered together, so low he could not make out the words. Only the cadence, like people chanting in unison through throats full of water. Min raised his camera. His fingers trembled, but he still pressed the shutter. The click rang out sharply. The flash burst. For the instant that white light cut across the door, Min saw that the marks around the frame were not mold or damp stains but countless handprints overlapping one another from the inside. Small and large prints of every size. Gray, black and elongated, as though people shut inside for years had clawed at the wood until it had nearly disintegrated. At the same instant, the whispering inside stopped. Then the doorknob turned slowly. Min stepped back once, but the door had already opened. Inside was a dark room. Deep, seeming far larger than the space that should have fit inside the building's structure. The bedside lamp in the corner cast a filthy yellow light that revealed walls stained with mold in shapes like melting human faces. The smell in the room was so thick Min almost vomited. Long-standing dampness, burnt incense, scorched hair, and beneath all of it the sweet metallic rot of flesh decomposing in water. The wooden floor was marked with black patches as if old blood had soaked into it. On the left stood a short wardrobe with one door hanging partly open. Across from the entrance was a large mirror, almost half of it clouded with rot. In the center of the room stood an iron bed covered with a white sheet. And beneath the thin cloth lay the shape of a person. Min knew he had to turn away. His body knew it clearly. The deepest instinct in every strand of his flesh was screaming at him not to step inside. But that invisible urge continued to draw him forward. One step, then another. The camera in his hand grew heavier, as if something alive inside it were struggling. Min stood at the edge of the bed. The white cloth covering the body beneath it rose and fell very faintly, as if it had only just recently stopped breathing. He swallowed hard, reached out as if to pull back the cloth, but before his hand touched it, the camera screen suddenly switched to live view. On the screen, the room appeared more clearly than it did to the naked eye. And on the bed, through the screen, the corpse beneath the cloth was not lying still. It was twitching, ever so slightly. Min jerked the camera away and looked with his own eyes. The cloth remained motionless. He looked back at the screen. Whatever lay beneath the cloth had just turned its head toward him. Min could not stop himself. He took another shot. The flash burst. The sheet was thrown halfway aside. The thing on the bed was revealed. It was Min. Not similar, not resembling him, but his exact face, except that the skin was pale to the point of gray-blue. The lips blackened, the eyes wide open and unblinking, and the eye sockets filled with thick black fluid. The corpse's neck had been twisted to an angle impossible for a living body. On its chest lay Min's camera, the same model he held in his hands, except that its screen was shattered and dried blood clung to its edges. Min stumbled backward and slammed into the wardrobe. The door flew open. Dozens of photographs spilled out and scattered across the floor. Face up beneath the lamplight, Min looked down, and the blood in his body seemed to freeze. Every one of them was a photograph taken in this room. In the pictures were many different people, men, women, old people, young adults, and each wore the same expression, absolute terror. In every photo, behind them, there was always the shadow of a woman with long hair in an old white dress. Her face blurred as if stretched. Some pictures did not clearly show the victim's face, but in the lower corner of every photo a date had been written in black ink. The date stretched across nearly 30 years. A wet sound suddenly came from behind Min. He turned. The corpse on the bed had sat up. Its head was still bent to one side. Its eyes were wide open. Its mouth slowly widened as though something inside were pulling it apart. From its throat came a dry rasping sound that gradually formed human speech. Warped and broken. "Don't take any more." Min screamed and backed toward the door. But when he turned, the door had vanished. In its place was only a mold-stained wall. The room suddenly lengthened. The ceiling lowered. The air thickened like slime. Min spun around in panic. The mirror opposite the bed reflected the room. But in the mirror he was not alone. Behind him, crammed together in the reflection, were dozens of pale faces standing shoulder to shoulder. Eyes wide open, mouths moving without sound. All were the faces from the photographs scattered on the floor. And in the middle of them, most clearly visible, was the face of a young woman with black hair plastered down. Her neck broken at a grotesque angle. Her lips split to the corners. She was smiling at Min. That had to be Lan. The camera in Min's hand suddenly clicked even though he had not pressed anything. Then it clicked again, and again. The shutter began operating madly on its own. The flash fired continuously, and with each burst of light it struck Min's eyes with a different image of the room. The corpse on the bed first lying down, then sitting, then standing at the foot of the bed. The girl in the mirror first far away, then only inches from Min's back. The figures crowding the ceiling like damp insects clinging to the carcass of an animal. Min tried to shut the camera off, but he could not. The buttons burned hot beneath his fingertips. The screen kept displaying new photos that had just been taken. In the first, Min was pressed against the wall, his face twisted with horror. In the second, behind his back, a pale hand had already emerged from the mirror. In the third, that hand rested on his shoulder. In the fourth, Lan's face was pressed just behind Min's head, her lips touching his ear. In the fifth, while Min was still standing in the room, another corpse with his face had appeared on the bed. Min hurled the camera to the floor. Instead of shattering, it gave off a long moaning sound like an animal half crushed to death. The room trembled slightly. From the corners of the walls, blackness began to seep out like water. It crawled along the baseboards and then climbed the ceiling, gathering into distorted human shapes. Lan's voice rang out more clearly now, no longer coming from any fixed place but seeming to sound from inside Min's ears. From his jawbone, from his chest. Do you think I'm beautiful? That day I only took one picture, only one, and then it looked back at me. A sudden memory that did not belong to Min drove into his head, fast and sharp as a shard of glass through the eye. He saw a young woman in a cream-colored sweater standing in this room many years earlier. She held a film camera, smiling faintly, an engagement ring still on her hand. She heard knocking inside the wall and thought it was a rat or water pipe. When she turned around, she saw door 317 appear in the mirror. She raised the camera and took a picture. In the photo that was later developed, behind her shoulder there stood a figure far too tall, with no face, but where its head should have been was a mound of flesh sprouting dozens of eyes. From that moment on, Lan began hearing the calling every night. It called her into the hallway. It told her the light in room 317 was beautiful. It told her she only needed to take one more picture. When she stepped into the room, the door shut behind her. The next morning they found her dead with her neck broken. But that was not yet the real death. The real death had begun the moment that photograph was taken. The memory dissolved, leaving a stabbing pain in Min's skull so severe that his vision blurred. He collapsed to the floor. Around him, the scattered photos began sliding across the floor, arranging themselves in a circle around him as though drawn by an invisible force. From each photograph, gray, rotting fingers slowly pushed past the edges of the paper. One hand, Then two. Then dozens. They clawed at the floor, dragging with them skinny, dripping arms and twisted faces, trying to crawl out of the pictures as if crawling out of water. Min sprang to his feet and hurled himself at the mirror. By some desperate logic, he thought that if 317 appeared through photographs and mirrors, then perhaps shattering the mirror would break it. He grabbed the lamp and smashed it against the glass. The mirror cracked apart. In the instant it shattered, Min saw what stood behind all those trapped souls. A figure nearly brushing the ceiling, with a body too thin, skin white as a drowned corpse. But where the face should have been, there was only a smooth mass of flesh with no features. Embedded all across that flesh were countless small cameras, old and new, lenses, eyes, flash bulbs, teeth, all pointed straight at him. Every lens was slightly open like a pupil. The thing stood perfectly still. Yet that stillness was more horrifying than any movement. It was like a pit looking back at the world. The instant the mirror shattered, all the flash bulbs in that mass of lenses flared at once. Min screamed and covered his face. In that white blast, he felt as if his skin and flesh were being peeled away layer by light itself. Hundreds, thousands of shutters snapped around his head. Each click tore away a piece of memory, his childhood, his mother's face, the first day he held a camera, an old love, the smell of the sky after rain. Everything was sucked into those glass eyes as film is pulled from a reel. Too late, he understood that this room did not merely kill people. It kept them. It photographed them until nothing remained but their final terror. Then forced that moment to live forever in a warped version of time. Min crawled backward, and his hand brushed against the camera on the floor. Its screen lit up again. There was only one frame left open, shooting mode. In the center of the screen, that faceless thing appeared clearly. An idea flashed through Min's mind. Insane but desperate. If everything began by photographing it, perhaps it also had to end with a photograph. He raised the camera with both trembling hands and aimed straight at the being standing behind the trapped spirits. Lan's voice sounded somewhere nearby, for the first time no longer filled with malice but almost pleading. "Don't, it wants to be seen." But Min pressed the shutter. The flash exploded. The entire room shook violently. A piercing sound erupted as if thousands of panes of glass had shattered at once. The faceless thing recoiled. A black crack appeared in the flesh where its head should have been. From that crack sprayed not blood, but countless torn photographs, strips of burnt film, and shriveled eyeballs. The spirits crawling from the pictures began screaming. The pitch so high it felt like drilling into bone. The walls split. Dust rained from the ceiling. The iron bed lurched sideways. Min staggered, part terrified, part relieved, but the next second he realized he had been wrong. The photograph had not killed it. The photograph had only made it open wider. The mound of flesh at the creature's head split further. Then into four, then into many petals like some diseased flower. Inside there was no brain or bone but a deep, bottomless darkness, and from that darkness countless faces began to appear, layered over one another, pushing against one another, all of them the faces of the people who had died in this room, fused together as though laminated beneath plastic. Their mouths hung open soundlessly. Among them Min saw Lan, an old man, a middle-aged woman, a little boy, a young couple, And then he saw himself. His pale face staring outward from a depth in the future that had not yet happened. The being stepped forward. Each step it took made no sound. But the floor beneath Min trembled as though a train were passing under the foundation. The camera in his hands burned hot. On the screen appeared a warped line of text. Something not belonging to the camera's system. The last photograph. Min turned and ran toward a crack of darkness that had opened in the wall where the door had once been. He did not know whether it was an exit or merely another trap. He only knew that if he remained where he was, he would become part of that thing. Beyond the darkness was a hallway. But it was not the third-floor hallway he had known. It stretched endlessly, lined on both sides with countless doors without numbers, all shut tight and silent. The ceiling lights extended into a line of tiny points fading into infinity. Behind him, room 317 still stood open, but now it looked like a rotting mouth gaping in the flesh of the wall. Min ran. His footsteps echoed hollowly. Each time he passed a door, knocking sounded from inside, followed by voices calling his name in different tones: male, female, old, young. Some were crying, some were laughing. One voice was Min's own, hoarse and lower than usual: "Don't run. There is no outside anymore." Min did not dare look sideways. Yet from the corner of his eye he still saw black water seeping from beneath every door. And the shadows of people standing just inside, waiting for him to stop. His breath broke raggedly. His chest burned. The hallway did not shorten. The more he ran, the more it seemed to lengthen. Then, far ahead, Min saw another door. Not a hotel room door, but an emergency exit. Above it, a green sign flickered weakly. He gathered what strength he had left and threw himself toward it. Grabbing the handle, the door opened. Min fell sprawling onto the floor of the stairwell. The stairwell lights were bright white. Dust, concrete, ordinary dampness. No more voices. No more endless hallway. Only the wild pounding of his heart in his chest. Min dragged himself upright and turned back. The door he had just burst through was only the third-floor emergency exit door. Painted old green, with no trace of 317. He stood there gasping for a long time, gripping the railing so hard it hurt. A fragile thought flickered through him. Maybe he had escaped. But when he looked down at the camera still in his hand, the memory indicator light was blinking. A mixture of curiosity and dread made him open the photo gallery. The last image he had taken in the hallway did not appear immediately. The screen stayed dark for a few seconds, then lit up. In the photo, Min was standing in the stairwell, his back turned to the camera, one hand gripping the railing. Everything looked exactly as it did now, except that behind him, through the slightly open emergency exit door, in the darkness of the hallway, something very tall was bending forward to look out. It had no face, but where its head should have been were dozens of tiny points of light like camera flashes about to fire. And right behind Min's shoulder in the photo, a pale woman's hand was slowly reaching out to rest upon him. A cold breath exhaled against the back of his neck. Min spun around. No one was there. Only the stark white stairwell. Empty. He looked up, at the landing of the fourth floor. A girl in a white dress stood in the darkness, her hair covering half her face. Her neck was bent sharply to one side like a broken branch. In her hands she held an old film camera. Without waiting for Min to react, she raised it to her face. The flash exploded. Min felt his whole body go numb. In that single burst of light, he saw not only the girl but a dozen other figures standing crowded together on the landings above. Motionless, each holding a camera aimed down at him. When darkness returned, all of them had vanished. The next morning, the cleaning staff discovered muddy wet footprints on the third-floor hallway stretching from the emergency exit all the way to the far end of the corridor, where there should have been only a solid wall. They also found Min's digital camera lying in the middle of the carpet, its strap torn loose, the battery completely drained. Min had vanished. No one saw him leave the hotel. The lobby cameras lost signal from 12:11 a.m. to 3:17 a.m. The recovered footage showed the third-floor hallway completely empty, except for a single frame distorted by static at 1:03 a.m. in that frame. At the end of the corridor, there appeared faintly a door that was not in the building plans. In front of it stood a man holding a camera with his back to the security camera. When the police enlarged the frame, they said the face reflected in the nearby glass was not the face of a living man. Min's disappearance was quickly filed away as an unresolved missing person case. Hong Van Hotel was investigated, questioned, and then continued operating. A new owner hired lawyers, repainted the exterior, replaced the sign, even changed the hotel's name. The receptionist changed, but no one lasted long on the third floor. Housekeeping staff often quit after only a few weeks because they kept having nightmares. Guests staying in rooms 308, 310, or 312 often complained that they heard the sound of a camera shutter at night, heard someone barefoot walking down the hallway, heard a young woman's voice ask very softly, "Do you see me in the picture?" Many checked out the very next morning. A few tried to act brave, laughing off the rumors, until they reviewed the photos on their phones or cameras. In the pictures taken on the third floor, there is sometimes one small extra detail that no one noticed while shooting. It may be an old door numbered 317 appearing at the end of the hallway. It may be a girl with a broken neck standing behind a reflection in the glass, black hair covering half her face. It may be a line of people standing shoulder to shoulder in the darkness, eyes wide open, skin as pale as photographic paper left too long in the developing tray. And sometimes, if the viewer scrolls slowly enough through each image, they will see a young man holding a camera standing somewhere in the frame. Very faint, as if the light has eaten away half his body. His face is gaunt, his eyes wide as though trying to warn of something. In some images he is staring directly at the viewer. In others, he is raising his hand as if to stop them. But everything lasts only a fraction of a second, easy to dismiss as a sensor error or a double exposure. No one knows whether that is Min, and no one wants to know too clearly. Several years later, a young tourist posted online a series of photos taken at that old hotel, praising it as full of vintage atmosphere, perfect for night photography. In the comments, most people talked about the tones, the grain, and the lighting. Among the hundreds of comments was one strange account that wrote only a single line: "If you go there, don't take photos on the third floor. Especially don't photograph the door numbered 317. That account had no profile picture, no personal information, And only a few minutes after the comment appeared, it vanished. But some people said they had clicked on the profile picture of that account before it disappeared completely. The profile image was only a very grainy black and white photograph of an old hotel corridor. At the end of the corridor stood the door numbered 317. In front of it was a man holding a camera, his face white as paper, his eyes wide open, and behind his back a woman's hand was resting very lightly on his shoulder, as though guiding him back inside. And the most horrifying thing was not in that photo, but in what the people who had seen it all described afterward. That very night, sometime after midnight, their phones lit up by themselves. The photo app opened on its own. The screen displayed a new image that had somehow appeared on their devices even though they had never taken it. In the image was a strange hallway, lit by filthy yellow lamps, carpet dark in color, and at the far end stood an old door slightly ajar. On the door was a tarnished brass number plate, 317, and if they zoomed in just a little more, looking carefully into the black crack of that half-open door, they would see an eye staring out from inside, unblinking, motionless, simply staring, as if it had stood there for a very long time, very patiently, waiting for the next person curious enough to raise a camera. Because that room no longer needed to exist inside the hotel. After so many years, after too many souls had been kept inside its deadly light, room 317 had learned how to exist inside photographs themselves. It was no longer trapped at the end of any one hallway. It traveled with pictures, with screens glowing in the night, with eyes that always wanted to look more deeply into darkness. It appeared wherever someone became too obsessed with recording what should never be recorded. It was patient, gentle, almost polite. It did not force itself upon people at once. It merely showed one small wrong detail, an unnecessary door, a blurred shadow, a face that should not be there. The rest, human beings would do for it themselves. They would zoom in, they would look again, they would stay up late, they would want to know more. And then at some moment between midnight and dawn, when the world is at its quietest and reason at its thinnest, they would hear a soft knock at the door, or the sound of a camera shutter in the hallway, or a young woman's voice whispering right behind them. The light in room 317 is beautiful. And by then, it is almost always too late. Because the most terrifying thing is not dying in that room. It is remaining there afterward. Held forever in the most horrifying moment of your life. Suspended between light and darkness like a photograph that can never finish developing. Mouth open because you were trying to scream. Eyes wide because you saw something not meant for the living. And every time someone new raises a camera, you wake once more in that damp darkness, hearing the shutter snap like bones breaking, knowing exactly what is about to happen again but unable to do anything except watch them step inside. Watch them approach the bed, approach the mirror, approach the door, and slowly realize, too late, that the thing waiting in room 317 never needed to kill people with its hands. It only needed to be seen. Only one photograph. Only one time for someone to believe they were brave enough to capture the darkness. And then the darkness would capture them back.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.